When Gabrielle Thompson received an invitation to the company's annual charity gala at 8:42 a.m. on a Thursday morning, slipped under the supply closet door where she was organizing cleaning products after finishing the night shift that paid $9 an hour, barely enough to cover rent and groceries and her 7-year-old daughter's school supplies, but somehow expected to be enough to survive on in a city where executives made more in a day than Gabrielle made in a month. She thought someone had made a mistake because cleaning ladies didn't get invited to events where CEOs and executives wore $1,000 gowns and raised millions for charity, where the cost of a single plate was more than Gabrielle's weekly paycheck, where people like her were invisible except when trash cans needed emptying or floors needed mopping, where she existed in the margins of their vision, noticed only when something wasn't clean enough, but never seen as fully human. But it wasn't a mistake. It wasn't someone accidentally putting an invitation under the wrong door, wasn't an administrative error, or a well-intentioned gesture from HR trying to make lower-wage workers feel included. It wasn't a genuine invitation extended because the company had suddenly decided that the woman who cleaned their offices deserved to attend their glamorous fundraiser, wasn't recognition of her humanity or acknowledgement that maybe someone who worked night shifts for poverty wages deserved to wear a pretty dress and eat expensive food and be treated like she mattered for one evening. It wasn't the company valuing her presence or seeing her as anything more than the person who emptied their trash cans while they slept. It was Natalie Pierce and 3 other marketing executives who'd orchestrated a cruel joke, who'd invited Gabrielle specifically so they could laugh at her when she showed up in whatever cheap dress a 30-year-old single mother working night shifts could afford, could mock her attempt to belong in their world, could take photos and share them among themselves as entertainment, because humiliating people they considered beneath them was apparently how executives bonded, how they proved their superiority, how they reminded themselves that their wealth and status meant they could treat other humans as jokes without consequences. And when Gabrielle walked into that ballroom at 7 p.m. on Saturday wearing a dress that made everyone stop talking, what happened next wasn't what anyone expected. Least of all, the executives who'd planned her humiliation and were waiting near the entrance with champagne and cameras ready to capture what they thought would be her embarrassment. If you believe that kindness should always win over cruelty, that dignity matters more than designer labels, that every human deserves respect regardless of their job title or paycheck, please like this video right now, share it with someone who needs to see it, and comment below where you're watching from. Your engagement helps these stories reach millions of people who need to know that dignity defeats mockery, that cruelty backfires, that the people who try to humiliate you often end up elevating you instead. Every like and share helps us build a community that believes treating people with respect isn't optional but essential. Gabrielle Thompson was 30 years old and worked as a cleaning lady at a corporate office building, worked the night shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. for $9 an hour, wages that were technically legal but morally indefensible given that $9 couldn't pay for rent and food and childcare and transportation and all the other necessities that poverty requires you to juggle constantly without ever having enough. She was a single mother to Jasmine, who was 7 years old and brilliant and kind and deserved everything Gabrielle couldn't afford to give her. Deserved new clothes instead of thrift store finds. Deserved her own bedroom instead of sharing Gabrielle's. Deserved a mother who wasn't exhausted constantly from working 2 jobs and still falling short of making ends meet. Gabrielle worked 2 jobs because one job at $9 an hour wasn't survivable. Cleaned offices at night and waitressed during the day, slept maybe 4 hours when she was lucky, survived on coffee and determination and the particular resilience that single mothers develop when giving up is an option because children are depending on you. She lived in a small, one-bedroom apartment that cost too much for what it was, but was the cheapest she could find that wasn't actively dangerous, dreamed of better life for Jasmine, better schools and safer neighborhood, and the kind of childhood security that comes from not worrying constantly about whether there's enough money for groceries. She'd graduated high school as valedictorian, had been smart enough for college but couldn't afford it, couldn't take out loans that would burden her for decades when she needed to work immediately to survive, had watched her dreams of higher education dissolve into the reality of needing to pay rent and buy food and accept that intelligence didn't matter if you didn't have money to develop it. She was intelligent and dignified despite circumstances designed to strip away dignity, carried herself with quiet grace even when executives looked through her like she was furniture, even when her existence was acknowledged only when something wasn't clean enough. Even when years of being invisible had taught her that people with wealth rarely saw people without it as fully human. Natalie Pierce was 35 years old and a marketing executive making $250,000 annually. Wealth that meant she never thought about whether she could afford things, never calculated grocery budgets or worried about rent, or understood what $9 an hour actually meant in terms of daily survival. She was mean girl who'd never grown up, had carried high school cruelty into corporate adulthood, where bullying was disguised as ambition and mockery was disguised as humor, and treating lower-wage workers as less than was normalized by everyone around her, who also had wealth and status and no accountability for their behavior. She led a group of cruel executives who bonded over making fun of people they considered lower class, who thought wealth made them better humans rather than just luckier humans, who genuinely believed that someone's paycheck determined their worth as person. Natalie made fun of workers who cleaned offices and served food and did the labor that kept the company functioning, but were paid poverty wages for essential work. Thought she was untouchable because her salary and her title and her position meant she could be cruel without consequences. Had learned that corporate culture protected executives even when executives were terrible humans. The company hosted an annual charity gala that cost $500 per plate, raised money ostensibly for underprivileged students to afford college. The irony apparently lost on executives who paid their cleaning staff $9 an hour, who created the underprivileged class they claimed to be helping, who raised millions for charity while paying poverty wages to the humans who emptied their trash. Executives attended in designer gowns and tuxedos, wore dresses that cost more than Gabrielle made in 2 months, demonstrated wealth that could have been redistributed as fair wages, but instead was displayed as status. Natalie's idea was to invite the cleaning lady as a joke, to slip an invitation under the supply closet door and wait for Gabrielle to show up so they could laugh at her, could mock whatever outfit she wore because someone making $9 an hour obviously couldn't afford gala-appropriate attire, could take photos and share them among themselves as entertainment. Imagine her showing up in some Walmart dress Natalie had said to the 3 other executives who thought this was a hilarious idea, who thought humiliating someone was funny, who thought cruelty was bonding activity. They slipped the invitation under the supply closet door Tuesday night, imagining Gabrielle's confusion and their eventual mockery. At 8:42 a.m. on Thursday morning, Gabrielle found the formal invitation while organizing cleaning supplies after finishing her shift, found heavy cardstock with elegant script that read, "You are cordially invited to attend the annual charity gala. Black tie event Saturday at 7 p.m. She was confused because cleaning ladies didn't get invited to galas, because this had to be mistake or joke or something she didn't understand. Considered not going because showing up where you're not genuinely wanted feels worse than staying home. Considered throwing the invitation away and pretending she'd never seen it. But Jasmine said when Gabrielle showed her the invitation that evening, "Mama, you should go," with 7-year-old certainty that her mother deserved pretty things, deserved to wear a dress and attend an event and be treated like she mattered. "You work so hard. You deserve pretty things." And Gabrielle's heart broke because her daughter was right. She did work hard, worked harder than most of the executives who'd be at that gala. And maybe she deserved one night of feeling like she belonged somewhere beyond supply closets and break rooms she cleaned while everyone else slept. Have you ever been invited somewhere just so people could mock you? Or shown up anyway, despite knowing you weren't genuinely wanted because dignity matters more than their cruelty? Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Thursday afternoon, after Gabrielle found the invitation, she sat in her small apartment staring at the heavy cardstock while Jasmine did homework at their shared table, wrestling with internal conflict that had no easy answer because part of her knew this might be a setup, might be executives finding entertainment in her poverty, might be designed to humiliate her in front of people who already didn't see her as human. But another part of her wanted to go, wanted to prove she belonged somewhere beyond supply closets, wanted to demonstrate that cleaning offices didn't make her less worthy of respect or dignity, or one evening in a beautiful dress, wanted Jasmine to see her mother as more than just the exhausted woman who worked 2 jobs and never had time or money for anything beyond survival. "I'm going," Gabrielle decided finally, the choice feeling simultaneously reckless and necessary, feeling like the only way to teach her daughter that accepting invisibility was worse than risking mockery. The dress problem became immediately apparent when Gabrielle checked her bank account and saw $43, her entire available balance until next week's paycheck, money that was already allocated to groceries and bus fare and couldn't be spent on a gala dress no matter how much she wanted one. She went to thrift stores Thursday evening after her waitressing shift, searched through racks of donated clothes looking for something that could work for a black tie event. Found nothing suitable because gala-appropriate dresses don't end up in thrift stores often, and when they do, they're snatched up immediately by people who recognize their value. She was about to give up, about to accept that $43 couldn't buy dignity, about to tell Jasmine that maybe Mama wouldn't go to the gala after all, because sometimes wanting something isn't enough when poverty makes wanting expensive. Friday night, while Gabrielle was cleaning the executive floor during her night shift, mopping floors that executives would walk across without noticing they were clean, emptying trash cans full of discarded Starbucks cups that cost more than her hourly wage, she found a note on one of the desks, simple white envelope with her name written in careful handwriting. Inside was a note that read, "For the gala. You deserve this." A friend and $200 in cash, $20 bills that represented more money than Gabrielle usually had at one time. More generosity than she'd experienced in years of being invisible to people with resources. Gabrielle started crying there in the empty office at 2 a.m. Cried because someone had seen her, someone had heard about the invitation and understood what it meant and what it would cost and had given her money they probably needed themselves. Cried because kindness existed even in places designed to strip it away. Even in corporate buildings where wealth created distance between humans who should have been connected. She didn't know it was Mr. Chen, the elderly janitor who'd worked there for 40 years, who was 72 years old and had been planning to retire next year, who'd overheard Natalie and her executives laughing about their joke, who'd gone home and taken $200 from his savings and brought it back in an envelope because he couldn't let cruelty win without fighting back, couldn't watch them humiliate someone without trying to help. Saturday morning, Gabrielle used the $200 for the dress she needed, took the bus to a consignment shop in a wealthier neighborhood where women sold dresses they'd worn once to charity events and never needed again, found an elegant navy dress that was simple but stunning, that fit her perfectly and cost $150, which felt like fortune, but was apparently reasonable for secondhand formal wear. She got her hair done at a small salon for $30. Nothing fancy, but professional enough that she looked polished instead of exhausted, looked like someone who belonged at galas instead of someone who cleaned up after them. Jasmine helped with makeup that evening, 7-year-old hands carefully applying lipstick while Gabriel tried not to cry and ruin everything. "Mama, you look like a princess," Jasmine said with absolute certainty. And Gabriel thought maybe her daughter was right. Maybe she did look like she belonged somewhere beyond their small apartment. At 6:45 p.m., 15 minutes before she needed to leave, Gabriel stood in front of their bathroom mirror and assessed everything that had led to this moment, cataloged the facts that would determine what happened next and what it would mean regardless of outcome. She knew they'd invited her as a joke, had probably overheard executives laughing about it during her shifts, had seen enough cruelty in 5 years of being invisible to recognize setup when she saw one. She could stay home and avoid humiliation, could take off the navy dress and put on her work clothes and accept that people like her didn't belong at galas, could teach Jasmine that sometimes accepting your place was safer than challenging it. But she'd worked at this company for 5 years and had never been acknowledged as human, had emptied trash and mopped floors and cleaned bathrooms, and remained invisible to everyone except when something wasn't clean enough, had existed in the margins of their awareness without ever being seen. She was invisible to these people in ways that went beyond not noticing her, invisible in ways that meant they didn't consider her as having thoughts or feelings or a life beyond the labor she provided, didn't see her as someone who'd been high school valedictorian but couldn't afford college, didn't know she was taking online classes one course at a time, working toward a business degree that would take her 8 years to complete at the pace poverty allowed, didn't know anything about her except that she cleaned their offices and therefore didn't matter. They saw cleaning lady not human, saw job title not person, saw poverty wages as evidence of her limited worth rather than as evidence of their exploitation. Going to the gala meant facing their mockery, meant walking into a room full of people who'd invited her as entertainment, meant risking humiliation that would confirm everything they believed about her being less than. But not going meant accepting invisibility, meant agreeing that she didn't deserve to exist in spaces where wealth congregated, meant teaching Jasmine that her mother hid from cruelty instead of facing it with dignity. She was going to show up with dignity intact regardless of what happened, was going to walk into that ballroom with her head high and her dress elegant and her presence undeniable. Whatever happens, Jasmine will see her mother refuse to hide. We'll learn that dignity isn't about what you can afford, but about how you carry yourself when people try to make you feel small. At 7 p.m., while Gabrielle was getting into the rideshare she'd splurged on because taking the bus in a gala dress felt impossible, Natalie Pierce and 3 other marketing executives positioned themselves near the ballroom entrance, with phones ready to record and champagne glasses in hand, laughing about the joke they'd orchestrated and the entertainment they were about to witness. "This is going to be hilarious," one of them said, scrolling through her phone to make sure the camera was ready. "Wait till she walks in wearing whatever she could afford at Walmart," Natalie added, her smile cruel and confident, secure in the knowledge that humiliating someone who couldn't fight back was consequence-free fun, that mocking poverty was acceptable entertainment among people wealthy enough to be insulated from empathy. At 7:05 p.m., Gabrielle walked into the ballroom wearing the elegant navy dress that was simple but stunning in ways that expensive doesn't always achieve. Hair styled beautifully in ways that showed she'd invested care, not just money, Makeup subtle but professional in ways that enhanced rather than covered. She carried herself with dignity that had nothing to do with her dress and everything to do with having decided that showing up mattered more than their mockery, that existing visibly was more important than hiding safely. The room gradually went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when something unexpected happens. When the narrative everyone expected gets disrupted by reality they didn't anticipate. People were staring not because Gabrielle looked bad or out of place, or like the joke Natalie had promised, but because she looked stunning in ways that had nothing to do with the dress and everything to do with the dignity she carried, the quiet grace that poverty hadn't stripped away, the humanity that 5 years of invisibility hadn't erased. Natalie's smile faded as she watched Gabrielle approach, her expression shifting from anticipation to confusion, to something that might have been shame if she'd been capable of shame. "That's not," she started, her voice uncertain. "She's not supposed to," unable to complete the sentence because Gabrielle wasn't performing the poverty-stricken humiliation they'd planned, wasn't giving them the entertainment they'd orchestrated. They'd expected Walmart dress and got elegance, expected embarrassment and got dignity, expected confirmation of their superiority and got evidence of their cruelty. Gabrielle approached their group directly, made eye contact with Natalie and the 3 executives who'd planned her humiliation, and said with perfect composure, "Thank you for the invitation." Natalie was speechless, phone still in hand but camera not recording, because this wasn't the footage she'd planned to share, wasn't the mockery she'd promised her friends, wasn't the confirmation that wealth made them better humans and poverty made Gabrielle lesser. At 7:10 p.m., William Reynolds, the CEO, took the stage and began his speech about tonight's charitable purpose, about raising money for underprivileged students to help them afford college because everyone deserves opportunity. His words carrying irony that wasn't lost on Gabrielle, who was literally the underprivileged person they claimed to be helping, who'd been high school valedictorian but couldn't afford college, who was taking online classes one at a time while working for $9 an hour, cleaning offices for executives who made $250,000 and thought inviting her to their charity gala as a joke was acceptable behavior. She stood there in her navy dress, listening to wealthy people discuss helping the underprivileged while paying poverty wages to the woman who cleaned their trash, while creating the economic conditions that made underprivileged students exist, while raising millions for charity that could have been distributed as fair wages, but instead was processed through galas that cost $500 per plate. At 7:15 p.m., 5 minutes after William Reynolds began his speech about helping underprivileged students afford education, he announced a new initiative that made Gabrielle's heart skip because the numbers he was describing represented transformation, represented the difference between 8 years of struggling through online classes, one course at a time, and actually finishing a degree while her daughter was still young enough to remember her mother graduating. "We're establishing a full scholarship for an employee pursuing education," Reynolds said, his voice carrying across the ballroom to people who'd never worried about affording college, who'd never had to choose between tuition and rent. "Someone who embodies our values of perseverance and dedication. $50,000 towards completing their degree." Gabrielle thought that $50,000 could change everything, could mean she'd graduate in 2 years instead of 8, could mean Jasmine would see her mother walk across the stage and receive a diploma instead of just hearing about a degree that existed only as distant possibility, could mean the difference between surviving and actually thriving. But she assumed the scholarship was for executives' children, for the sons and daughters of people making 6 figures who technically qualified as employees through nepotism or internships, for people who had connections and visibility and didn't clean offices at night while everyone slept. Certainly not for the cleaning lady who'd been invisible for 5 years, except when these same executives had decided she'd make entertaining joke. This year's recipient was nominated by a colleague, Reynolds continued, and something in his tone suggested this wasn't typical scholarship announcement, wasn't going to the expected recipient that people had already guessed. Someone who's worked here 40 years, who's seen generations of employees come and go, who noticed something the rest of us missed. The nomination letter said, and Reynolds pulled out a piece of paper to read directly, "She works 3 jobs, takes online classes whenever she can afford them, raises a daughter alone, and still treats everyone with kindness, even though most people don't acknowledge she exists." Gabrielle's heart started racing because that sounded like her exact life described by someone who'd been paying attention when everyone else looked through her. But it couldn't be her because cleaning ladies didn't get $50,000 scholarships, didn't get recognized at charity galas, didn't suddenly become visible after years of being treated like furniture. "Gabrielle Thompson, please come up," Reynolds said. And Gabrielle froze because surely she'd misheard. Surely he'd said a different name that sounded similar. Surely this was mistake or continuation of the joke Natalie had orchestrated, except Reynolds looked sincere, and the room erupted in applause, and people were turning to look at her, and Natalie's face showed shock and horror, which suggested this wasn't part of the plan, wasn't the humiliation they'd scripted, but something else entirely. Gabrielle walked to the stage shaking, legs barely supporting her weight, convinced that any moment someone would realize this was error, would stop her before she reached the microphone, would announce that obviously the scholarship wasn't for the cleaning lady, but for someone whose name coincidentally sounded similar. But Reynolds was shaking her hand and speaking to her directly, and the scholarship check was real, $50,000 made out to Gabrielle Thompson for educational expenses. And his words confirmed this wasn't mistake, but recognition that someone had decided she deserved. "I didn't know we had employees pursuing degrees while working night shifts," Reynolds said, his voice carrying genuine surprise that suggested maybe CEOs didn't actually know what happened in their buildings after they went home, didn't understand what working for $9 an hour actually meant in terms of trying to afford education. "Mr. Chen nominated you, told me you're taking business classes online, working toward your degree 1 class at a time, fitting coursework between night shifts and waitressing and raising your daughter alone. That's exactly who this scholarship is for. Someone who's working harder than anyone should have to work and still finding ways to invest in their own education and future." Gabrielle stood at the microphone with tears streaming down her face, holding a check that represented years of struggle compressed into one moment of recognition, years of being invisible suddenly transformed into being seen by a room full of people who'd never noticed her before. "I don't know what to say," she began, voice shaking because nothing in 5 years of cleaning offices had prepared her for standing on stage being acknowledged as human deserving of investment. "I clean your offices at night. I empty your trash cans and mop your floors and organize your supply closets. Most of you have never seen me, or if you have, you looked through me like I wasn't there, like I was furniture that occasionally moved but never required acknowledgement as person with thoughts and feelings and dreams, and a daughter who deserves better than what $9 an hour can provide. Some of you invited me here as a joke," Gabrielle continued, and she didn't look at Natalie but everyone else did. Room full of people turning to see who would orchestrate such cruelty, who would think humiliating poverty was entertainment. Natalie's face was mortified, expression cycling through shame and anger and fear, as she realized her joke had backfired spectacularly, had exposed her cruelty to everyone, including the CEO who was currently looking at her with expression that suggested Monday would bring consequences. But someone saw me, Gabriel said, voice breaking on the words. Really saw me. Not as cleaning lady or job title or person who exists to serve you, but as human being working towards something better, trying to build future for my daughter, taking classes whenever I can afford them, which isn't often because $9 an hour doesn't leave much for tuition after rent and food and childcare. Mr. Chen, thank you, Gabriel said, looking toward the back of the ballroom where the elderly janitor stood wiping tears, where the man who'd given her $200 from his retirement savings and nominated her for a scholarship stood watching the woman he'd helped receive recognition she deserved. Thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked through me, for understanding what this opportunity means, for giving me money you probably needed yourself so I could have a dress that let me show up with dignity. And thank you, she said to Reynolds in the room at large, for this scholarship. My daughter will see her mother graduate college. She'll see that working hard matters, that education matters, that being invisible doesn't mean being worthless. That's worth more than $50,000. That's worth more than anything. After Gabriel's speech, after the standing ovation that lasted longer than any applause Natalie had ever received for quarterly reports or marketing campaigns, William Reynolds approached Natalie with expression that made clear her joke had not only failed, but had exposed her cruelty to exactly the person whose opinion mattered most for her career trajectory. I heard about your joke, Reynolds said quietly, voice low enough that only Natalie and her three co-conspirators could hear, but sharp enough that they understood consequences were coming. Heard you invited Gabriel specifically so you could mock her, so you could take photos of her dress and laugh about poverty, like other people suffering was your entertainment. HR will be contacting you Monday morning. It was just, Natalie stammered, trying to formulate excuse that would make inviting someone to mock them sound less cruel than it was. Trying to explain that humiliating the cleaning lady had seemed like harmless fun when planned among executives who'd never experienced being on the receiving end of such cruelty. You're suspended pending investigation, Reynolds said, cutting off her excuses because there was no excuse that made workplace bullying acceptable, no justification that transformed cruelty into something defensible. We don't tolerate bullying at this company, though apparently we've been tolerating it without realizing, been allowing executives to treat lower-wage workers as less than without noticing, because those workers were invisible to us. Because we created an environment where someone like Gabriel could work here 5 years, and I didn't know she was pursuing a degree, didn't know she was working 3 jobs, didn't know anything about her except that our offices were clean when I arrived in the morning. 2 weeks after the gala where Gabriel received a $50,000 scholarship and gave a speech that exposed Natalie's cruelty to everyone, including the CEO who controlled her career, Natalie was fired for workplace bullying after HR investigation confirmed she'd orchestrated the invitation specifically to humiliate an employee, had planned to photograph and mock Gabriel's appearance, had created hostile work environment that violated company policies everyone claimed existed, but apparently no one had been enforcing. The 3 other executives who'd participated in planning the joke were disciplined with suspensions and mandatory sensitivity training. Though their consequences felt lighter than they should have given, they'd been equally complicit in deciding that mocking poverty was acceptable entertainment. The company implemented a comprehensive anti-bullying policy that addressed not just overt harassment, but also the subtle ways that lower-wage workers were treated as less than. The invisibility that came from executives looking through cleaning staff and food service workers and maintenance personnel like they were furniture instead of humans. New training on respecting all employees regardless of their position or paycheck became mandatory for everyone from entry level to executive level. Though the fact that such training was necessary revealed how thoroughly the company had normalized treating people differently based on their economic status. Gabrielle was using the scholarship to enroll full-time in a business program that would let her complete her degree in 2 years instead of the 8 years she'd been facing when taking one class at a time whenever she could afford tuition, was finally able to be full-time student instead of someone trying to fit education into the gaps between survival. The company promoted her to administrative assistant with a salary of $45,000 annually, 5 times what she'd been making as cleaning lady, enough that she could afford rent and groceries and her daughter's needs without working 3 jobs, enough that poverty stopped being constant state and became something she was escaping rather than something defining her existence. She worked daytime hours now, which meant she could be with Jasmine after school, could help with homework and make dinner, and be present parent instead of exhausted ghost who slept 4 hours and worked 20. No more night cleaning shifts, which meant no more mopping floors at 2 a.m. while everyone else slept. Mr. Chen received a $5,000 bonus from the CEO, who'd learned about the $200 he'd given Gabrielle from his retirement savings, received public thanks at a company meeting where Reynolds told everyone that Chen had seen something the rest of them had missed, had recognized that the cleaning lady was human worthy of help, and had given what he could afford to make sure cruelty didn't win without fight. The $5,000 repaid Chen's $200+ substantial gratitude, gave him financial cushion for retirement he'd been planning next year, acknowledged that sometimes the people with the least give the most because they understand what needing help feels like. "I just saw someone who needed help," Chen said when thanked, his 72-year-old voice carrying the particular wisdom of someone who'd spent 40 years watching executives ignore the humans who kept their building functioning, who decided that silence was complicity and action was necessary even when action cost him money he needed. 6 months after the gala, Gabrielle was excelling in her business classes with a 4.0 GPA that proved what she'd always known, but poverty had prevented her from demonstrating that intelligence had never been her limitation, but resources had been, that she'd been capable of academic excellence all along, but $9 an hour hadn't left room for showing it. She worked as administrative assistant during the day and studied at night. Schedule that was still demanding, but felt sustainable compared to working 3 jobs and sleeping 4 hours. Felt like progress towards something better instead of treading water trying not to drown. Jasmine was so proud, told everyone at school that her mama was going to college, that her mama was going to be somebody important. "My mama's going to be somebody," Jasmine said with 7-year-old certainty that success was measured by degrees and titles and visible achievement. "Baby, I already was somebody," Gabrielle replied gently, needing her daughter to understand that worth wasn't contingent on education or salary or any external validation, that she'd been somebody when she was cleaning offices, and she was somebody now taking classes, and she'd be somebody regardless of what happened next. They just couldn't see it. They looked at me and saw cleaning lady, saw job title instead of human, saw poverty wages as evidence of my limited worth instead of as evidence of their exploitation. But I was always somebody. You were always somebody. We don't become valuable when people finally notice us. We're valuable whether they notice or not. Gabrielle volunteered with a scholarship program that had changed her life, helped other working-class employees apply for educational funding they didn't know existed, became advocate for the invisible workers who cleaned offices and served food and maintained buildings while being treated as less than by people whose comfort depended on their labor. She spoke at company events about her experience, about being invisible for 5 years, about being invited as a joke, about receiving a scholarship that transformed not just her circumstances, but her daughter's entire future, about the importance of seeing all employees as humans, regardless of what they were paid or what title they held. 1 year after the gala where she'd been invited as cruel joke, Gabrielle was invited to the next year's charity gala, genuinely this time, invited as scholarship recipient who would give speech about how education funding changes lives, invited as employee who'd gone from cleaning offices at night to studying business during the day, invited as human being whose story mattered instead of as punchline for executives' entertainment. She stood on the same stage where she'd accepted a $50,000 scholarship 12 months earlier and told the room full of wealthy people what had happened and what it meant. "Last year I was invited as a joke," Gabrielle said, not hiding the truth because the truth needed to be told, because cruelty needed to be named, not disguised. Executives thought it would be funny to watch me show up in whatever cheap dress I could afford, thought my poverty was entertainment, thought humiliating me was acceptable because I was invisible to them. "I came anyway," Gabrielle continued, voice steady despite emotion. Despite remembering how terrified she'd been walking into this ballroom wearing a dress bought with an elderly janitor's savings, despite knowing that showing up had required more courage than most people in this room would ever need. "Because my daughter taught me that showing up with dignity is the best response to cruelty, that refusing to hide is how you fight invisibility, that letting people see you even when they want to mock you is how you prove you're human, whether they acknowledge it or not." Jasmine was in the audience for the first time, 8 years old now and wearing a pretty dress that Gabrielle had bought without calculating whether they could afford it, sitting in the front row watching her mother speak to a room full of people who'd previously ignored her. "My daughter said to me last year," Gabrielle told the audience, "Mama, you deserve pretty things." She was right, though not for the reasons she thought, not because of dresses or scholarships or promotions or any external validation, but because every person deserves dignity regardless of what they can afford, deserves respect regardless of their job title, deserves to be seen regardless of whether seeing them is convenient for people with wealth and power. The room erupted in standing ovation that lasted longer than Gabrielle's speech, applause that represented not just appreciation for her words, but acknowledgement of the truth she'd spoken, the discomfort she'd created by naming invisibility that everyone had participated in creating. After the event, after the speeches and the fundraising and the networking that Gabrielle was now included in instead of excluded from, she and Jasmine walked to their car together, same rideshare pickup spot where Gabrielle had arrived terrified last year. "Mama, you were right," Jasmine said, looking up at her mother with 8-year-old wisdom. "About what?" Gabrielle asked, unsure which conversation Jasmine was referencing among the many they'd had about worth and dignity and being seen. "Being somebody," Jasmine said. "You always were. Not just now that you're in college or have a better job or gave a speech. You were always somebody even when they couldn't see it." "We both are, baby," Gabrielle said, pulling her daughter close. "We both are." They invited the cleaning lady to laugh at her, slipped an invitation under the supply closet door as a cruel joke so Natalie Pierce and her executive friends could mock whatever cheap dress a 30-year-old single mother working night shifts for $9 an hour could afford, could record her humiliation and share it among themselves as entertainment. Because people they considered beneath them weren't fully human, weren't worthy of dignity or respect or basic kindness, were invisible except when their labor was needed, and visible only when mocking them provided entertainment. But Gabrielle Thompson showed up anyway, wearing a dress bought with $200 that an elderly janitor had given her from his retirement savings because he'd overheard their plan and couldn't let cruelty win without offering whatever resistance he could afford. walked into that ballroom with her head high and dignity intact and presence that demanded acknowledgement even from people who'd spent 5 years looking through her. And what happened next wasn't what anyone expected, wasn't the humiliation Natalie had orchestrated, or the entertainment executives had anticipated, or the confirmation that wealth made them superior and poverty made Gabrielle lesser. The CEO announced a $50,000 scholarship for an employee pursuing education, nominated by Mr. Chen, who'd worked there 40 years and had seen things executives missed, awarded to the cleaning lady the executives had invited as a joke. Scholarship that would let Gabrielle complete her business degree in 2 years instead of 8, that would transform her circumstances from surviving to thriving. That would let her daughter see her mother graduate college and understand that education matters, and hard work matters, and intelligence was never the limitation, but resources had been. And Gabrielle's speech about being invisible for 5 years, about cleaning offices while executives looked through her like she was furniture, about some people inviting her as a joke, but someone else seeing her as human worthy of help, about showing up with dignity despite cruelty, left everyone speechless, including Natalie, whose face showed mortification as she realized her joke had exposed her cruelty to exactly the person whose opinion mattered most for her career. The CEO who would fire her 2 weeks later for workplace bullying after HR investigation confirmed she'd orchestrated humiliation of another employee for entertainment. Because sometimes the people who try to humiliate you end up elevating you instead. Sometimes their cruelty backfires and exposes them while uplifting you. Sometimes the joke designed to make you small ends up making you visible in ways that transform your entire life. Sometimes cruelty backfires spectacularly when kindness intervenes. When elderly janitors give their savings and CEOs create scholarships and companies recognize that maybe treating cleaning ladies as less than is actual problem, not just unfortunate norm. Sometimes the joke is on the people who thought invisibility meant insignificance, who believed that ignoring someone made them less real, who assumed that poverty wages meant poverty of character or intelligence or worth. And sometimes a cleaning lady teaches executives more about dignity than they learned in business school about success, teaches them that showing up matters more than showing off, that being seen requires refusing to hide even when hiding feels safer, that humanity isn't determined by salary or title, but by how you treat people and how you carry yourself when people try to make you feel worthless. If this story reminded you that every person deserves dignity regardless of their job or paycheck, that cruelty always backfires eventually, that showing up with your head high defeats mockery every time, then you know these messages need to reach more people who are being treated as invisible, who are being mocked for their poverty, who need to know that dignity defeats cruelty always. Have you ever been underestimated and proven people wrong? Ever been invisible and demanded to be seen? Ever shown up with dignity when people expected you to hide in shame? Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and rate this story from 0 to 10 because your engagement tells us these messages about respect and dignity and seeing everyone as human regardless of their circumstances matter to you. Matter enough to share. Matter enough to spread to the millions of people who clean offices and serve food and do essential labor while being treated as less than by people whose comfort depends on their invisibility.